When I first started learning English, I had no teacher, no classes, and no fancy courses. All I had was a small dictionary, a few radio stations, and a big dream to speak a language that could open the world to me. At that time, many people told me it was impossible. They said, "How can you learn a language without a teacher?" But I believe that effort is the best teacher and curiosity is the best classroom. When I first started learning English, I didn't have a teacher, a classroom, or anyone to guide me. I had no online courses, no apps, and no proper books. What I did have was curiosity, determination, and a deep desire to understand the world beyond my small city. Many people around me spoke my native language, and English felt like a faraway mountain that only the rich or the talented could climb. I wasn't rich, and I didn't think I was talented either, but I believed that if others could learn it, so could I. That belief became my only weapon. In the beginning, I was completely lost. I didn't even know how to start. I remember finding an old English newspaper that I couldn't read at all, but I kept it like a treasure. Every morning, I looked at those words and tried to make sense of them. I didn't understand the meanings, but I liked the way the letters looked, the rhythm of the language, the feeling of something new. Slowly, I began to match words with their meanings using a small dictionary. It wasn't easy. Sometimes I spent hours on one paragraph, but every time I understood a single line, I felt a small victory. That feeling of progress kept me moving. There were times I wanted to give up. I would listen to people speaking English and feel like I was chasing a shadow. The words came too fast, the accent too strong, and I couldn't follow anything. But deep down, I realized that waiting for the perfect conditions would mean waiting forever. I had to start where I was with whatever I had. I remember sitting near tourist spots just to listen to foreigners talk. I didn't understand much, but I tried to catch a few words, repeat them softly, and remember their sound. Sometimes I practiced at night, whispering English words into the dark, trying to train my tongue to move differently. It might sound strange, but those quiet moments became my classroom. I didn't have anyone to correct me, so I became my own teacher. I used a mirror to practice conversations. I would ask myself questions in English and answer them out loud. At first, I felt silly, but after a few weeks, I started enjoying it. The mirror didn't judge me, it reflected my progress. Every mistake, every awkward sentence became a lesson. I realized that learning alone doesn't mean learning without progress. It means learning with courage. When you start where you are, you discover how much potential you already have. People often think success comes from big opportunities, but most success stories begin in small, invisible moments. For me, learning English started with a 10-minute habit. 10 minutes turned into 30, and soon an hour passed without me realizing. I carried a notebook everywhere, writing down new words from street signs, songs, or newspapers. I didn't just memorize them, I used them in my daily thoughts. I began thinking in English, describing my day, my dreams, and my mistakes in this new language. Slowly, my mind adjusted. What used to feel impossible became natural. There were moments of frustration, times when I doubted myself. Some days it felt like I wasn't improving at all. But then I reminded myself that learning isn't a straight road, it's a climb. You may not notice progress every day, but every step takes you higher. Even when I felt stuck, I knew I was still better than the person who hadn't started. That thought gave me power. Sometimes I met people who laughed when I spoke broken English. Instead of getting angry, I smiled. I knew they were laughing at my mistakes, but I also knew something they didn't. I was improving, and they were not. The truth is, when you start where you are and use what you have, the world may not understand you at first. But eventually, it will listen. Every expert was once a beginner. Every confident speaker once stammered through their first words. I learned that real learning doesn't begin with resources, it begins with resourcefulness. It's not about how much you have, but how much you make out of what you have. I had a dictionary and a dream, and that was enough. Every small effort added up. Every morning I practiced pronunciation. Every night I wrote something new. And every mistake I made brought me closer to understanding. There was no magic moment of success. Just 1,000 small steps taken with belief. When you start where you are, you stop waiting for permission to grow. You don't wait for a teacher, a perfect accent, or the right time. You realize that your journey can begin today, exactly where you stand, with exactly what you have. When I first began learning English, I quickly discovered that the hardest part was not understanding words. It was staying consistent. At the start, I was full of motivation. I made plans, I watched videos. I promised myself I would practice every day. But after a few days, the excitement faded. It became boring, tiring, and repetitive. I started skipping days, telling myself I'd continue tomorrow. And tomorrow turned into a week. That was the moment I realized something powerful talent can give you a good start, but only consistency can take you to the finish line. Every day that I skipped learning, my confidence dropped. Every time I stopped practicing, my progress disappeared a little. I began to understand that the real battle in learning any skill is not against the subject. It's against your own laziness, your doubts, and your excuses. The truth is, most people fail not because they can't learn, but because they stop trying. So, I made a new rule for myself no matter how tired, busy, or unmotivated I felt. I would do something in English every single day. Even if it was just 10 minutes, I wouldn't break the chain. At first, it was difficult. There were days when I came home exhausted, when my mind didn't want to think, when my heart whispered, take a break. But I still opened my notebook, wrote a few lines, or listened to an English song. Those small actions felt useless at the time, but looking back, they built the strongest habit of my life. Slowly, my brain started expecting that routine. Learning English stopped feeling like a task and became part of my day, like brushing my teeth or eating breakfast. I realized that consistency doesn't mean doing a lot. It means doing anything, regularly. You can learn for 10 minutes and still grow if you do it every day. That's the beauty of discipline. It multiplies results quietly. Every small effort you make today becomes invisible preparation for tomorrow's success. There were times when I thought I wasn't improving at all. But months later, I suddenly noticed that I could understand movies better, or speak faster, or remember words without looking them up. Consistency had been working silently in the background, shaping my skills when I wasn't even aware of it. There is a common mistake people make. They want quick results. They start strong, work hard for a few days, and when they don't see progress, they quit. I've learned that language learning doesn't reward speed, it rewards persistence. The progress is slow, but it never stops if you keep going. Just like drops of water can shape a rock, small daily efforts can shape your mind. I told myself, don't compete with others. Just compete with who you were yesterday. Every day that I stayed consistent, I won that competition. Consistency also builds confidence. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you prove to your mind that you are reliable. When I forced myself to learn even when I didn't want to, I felt a small victory inside. Those victories built momentum. Momentum is powerful. It makes hard things easier. Once you build it, learning doesn't feel like effort anymore. It becomes natural. That's why I believe consistency is stronger than talent. Talent gives you speed, but consistency gives you direction. There were days when I spoke terrible English. I mispronounced words, forgot grammar, and felt embarrassed. But I still practiced. I didn't wait to feel confident before speaking. I spoke until confidence arrived. That is what consistency does. It doesn't ask for perfection, it builds it slowly. Even when I failed, I didn't stop. I told myself, it's okay to fail today. Just don't fail to show up tomorrow. Over time, that attitude changed everything. The most surprising thing about consistency is that it teaches patience. When you do something daily, you stop expecting instant success. You start enjoying the process instead of rushing to the result. I began to love my daily learning sessions. Sometimes I learned a new idiom, sometimes I repeated old lessons, but every day I felt connected to my goal. The progress became my reward. People around me started noticing the difference. They asked how I managed to keep learning without giving up. I told them I wasn't smarter than anyone. I was simply more stubborn. I learned that progress doesn't come from big leaps. It comes from small steps repeated endlessly. There is power in routine. It turns ordinary people into extraordinary learners. I also learned to forgive myself when I made mistakes, but never to excuse myself from showing up. Missing a day didn't mean failure, but giving up on consistency did. I realized that habits don't care about mood. Whether I felt happy or sad, busy or free, tired or energetic, my job was to show up. Some days I learned a lot, some days almost nothing, but I was always present. Over time, I stopped fearing slow progress because I understood that even slow progress is still progress. When you are consistent, every effort counts. Every word you read, every sentence you write, every conversation you attempt becomes a building block for your success. The most beautiful part is that you don't see it happening day by day, but one morning you wake up and realize you've become fluent in something that once felt impossible. When I was learning English, I made more mistakes than I can count. I mispronounced simple words, mixed up grammar rules, and forgot phrases right after learning them. Sometimes I tried to speak and ended up embarrassing myself in front of others. There were moments when I wanted to stop speaking altogether because I was afraid of sounding foolish. But over time, I realized something that changed everything for me. Mistakes were not my enemies. They were my best teachers. Every single time I made an error, I was one step closer to understanding. Every wrong word was a lesson disguised as failure. In the beginning, I used to take every mistake personally. I thought they showed how bad I was at learning, how far I still had to go. But the truth is, mistakes are proof that you are trying. They are the footprints of progress. If you never make mistakes, it means you're not challenging yourself enough. I started noticing that every successful learner I admired once spoke broken English too. They weren't born fluent, they became fluent through trial and error. That realization gave me strength. It taught me to stop hiding from my imperfections and start learning from them. There was a time when I joined an online group to practice English. During my first conversation, I froze. My mind went blank. My accent sounded strange, and I mixed up my tenses. People corrected me kindly, but I still felt embarrassed. That night, instead of quitting, I wrote down every mistake I made. I practiced those corrections until I could say them confidently. The next time I spoke, I made fewer mistakes, but still plenty. Again, I took notes, practiced, improved. This process repeated for months. Gradually, I noticed something beautiful. My mistakes started becoming smaller, and my confidence grew stronger. Mistakes have a secret quality. They make your learning real. Reading books and memorizing rules can give you knowledge, but making mistakes gives you experience. You can read about swimming for years, but until you jump into the water, you'll never know how to swim. Learning a language is the same. You can study grammar forever, but unless you use it, you won't grow. Every mistake I made while speaking was like taking a step deeper into the water. It was scary at first, but with time, it became natural. I also learned to laugh at myself. When I mispronounced a word or said something completely wrong, I stopped feeling ashamed. I laughed, corrected myself, and moved on. That small change in attitude made learning so much easier. When you are afraid of mistakes, you build walls around your mind. But when you accept them, those walls disappear, and your mind becomes free to grow. The less afraid I became, the faster I learned. Confidence didn't come from perfection, it came from acceptance. There were times I would record myself speaking just to hear my own mistakes. I hated it at first because it exposed every weakness in my pronunciation and tone. But the more I listened, the more I understood what needed fixing. I treated every recording like feedback from a teacher. Slowly, I began noticing improvements I hadn't seen before. My tongue moved more naturally, my sentences flowed better, and my voice sounded more confident. The same thing that once embarrassed me became my greatest tool for growth. Another thing I discovered was that mistakes are not permanent. A mistake you make today can become your strength tomorrow. Once, I used to mix up and constantly. It frustrated me to the point where I thought I would never fix it. But because I focused on that mistake so much, I became extra careful. Eventually, I stopped making that error altogether, and now it feels effortless. What was once my weakness turned into one of my most reliable skills. That's the power of learning from mistakes. They shape you, polish you, and turn you into someone more capable than before. I noticed that children learn faster than adults, not because they are smarter, but because they are not afraid of being wrong. They try, fail, laugh, and try again. Adults, on the other hand, fear judgment. That fear is what stops them from improving. The moment I let go of that fear, learning became joyful again. I didn't care if my accent wasn't perfect, or if I used the wrong tense. I cared only about expressing myself, and that freedom made all the difference. Sometimes people corrected me in ways that felt harsh, but even that helped me grow. I learned to listen without taking offense. Every correction was a gift, not an insult. I began to thank people for pointing out my mistakes instead of feeling hurt. Once I adopted this mindset, I realized that making mistakes in public is one of the fastest ways to learn. When you face embarrassment once, you rarely repeat that same error again. Over time, I built a relationship with my mistakes. I stopped running from them and started walking beside them. They became my companions on the journey, guiding me quietly. Every time I made one, I reminded myself that I was still moving forward. It didn't matter how many times I failed, as long as I didn't stop learning from each failure. When I started learning English, I thought fluency meant using big words and perfect grammar. I believed that if I could memorize thousands of words and sound smart, people would think I was good at English. But the more I studied, the more I realized that real communication isn't about showing how much you know. It's about making people understand what you mean. It's about connecting, not impressing. In the beginning, I focused too much on being correct, and that pressure made me hesitate every time I tried to speak. I would think about grammar, pronunciation, sentence structure, and by the time I was ready to say something, the moment had already passed. I wasn't communicating, I was performing. There came a moment when I met a traveler who spoke broken English, but spoke it confidently. His grammar was wrong. His sentences were short, but everyone listened to him. He used gestures, expressions, and emotion. He didn't worry about mistakes, and people understood him easily. That was when I understood something powerful. Communication isn't about words, it's about connection. You can speak with perfect grammar and still fail to connect, or you can speak simply and touch hearts. From that day on, I stopped chasing perfection and started focusing on clarity. I wanted people to feel what I was saying, not just hear the words. I began listening more than speaking. I paid attention to how people expressed ideas, how they used tone, pauses, and emotion. I noticed that good communicators don't always use complex language. They use human language. When they speak, their words have life. I started practicing that. I began to focus on expressing ideas, emotions, and stories instead of just forming sentences. I asked myself, what am I really trying to say? That question changed my entire way of learning. I realized that learning a language is not about memorizing lines from a book. It's about finding your voice in that language. Sometimes I would have conversations with people who spoke very little English. Yet we could talk for hours, laughing and understanding each other through gestures and simple words. On the other hand, I met people who spoke perfectly but couldn't hold a real conversation because they were afraid of saying something wrong. I used to be like that, trapped in my fear of judgment. But when I started focusing on communication instead of perfection, something changed inside me. I began to enjoy speaking. I stopped worrying about being right and started thinking about being real. That small shift made my English come alive. I practiced speaking naturally, as if I was talking to a friend. I stopped translating every sentence from my native language and started thinking directly in English. It felt uncomfortable at first, but slowly, my thoughts began to flow more freely. I realized that the goal of learning a language isn't to sound perfect. It's to be understood, to connect, to express. A person who can communicate ideas clearly will always go further than someone who only memorizes grammar rules. That understanding helped me gain confidence, even when my English wasn't perfect. Listening became my secret tool. I listened to podcasts, interviews, and movies, not just for words, but for emotion. I tried to feel the rhythm of the language. I noticed how people used simple phrases to express deep ideas. I learned how tone can change meaning, how a pause can make a sentence powerful, how sincerity can make even broken English beautiful. Communication is not built only by vocabulary, it's built by intention. If your intention is honest, your message will reach others, no matter how simple your words are. There were times when people didn't understand me, and I used to feel embarrassed. But then I started to look at it differently. Misunderstanding is also part of communication. When someone doesn't understand, you try another way. You use another word, another example, maybe even a gesture. Every time you do that, you're becoming a better communicator. Communication is not one direction. It's a dance between two people trying to understand each other. That mindset took away the fear and replaced it with creativity. Sometimes, while talking, I would use the wrong word, but the right emotion, and people still understood me. That taught me something I never forgot. People remember how you make them feel more than how perfectly you speak. I stopped focusing on being impressive and started focusing on being expressive. When I shared stories, I made sure they came from my experience, from my heart. When I listened, I paid attention not just to words, but to feelings. Gradually, English stopped being a subject I was learning and became a bridge I was building. One day, I found myself helping someone else practice English. They asked how I became confident. Even though my grammar wasn't perfect, I told them that confidence doesn't come from knowing every rule. It comes from knowing your purpose. If your purpose is to connect, you will always find a way to communicate. I also told them that speaking a language is not about proving intelligence. It's about creating understanding. If you speak with sincerity, people will listen, even if you make mistakes. Through all of this, I discovered that learning to communicate in English taught me how to communicate in life. I learned that words alone are never enough. It's the emotion behind them that matters. I learned that listening is as powerful as speaking. And I learned that true fluency doesn't come when you stop making mistakes. It comes when you stop fearing them and start expressing yourself honestly.